Hi everyone, welcome back to How to Make Climate Change Sexy, the podcast where I dive into conversations with guests who are using culture and innovation to address the climate crisis. Together we'll explore how their creative approaches can become powerful tools for driving the change our planet needs. Today I'm incredibly excited to sit down with Rachel. They're a video journalist, performer and visual artist who spent years in the creative industry. Rachel is passionate about integrating sensitivity, accessibility, and a sense of joy into conversations around sustainability. In this episode, we'll discuss their journey from fashion to climate justice, their unique insights on personal style, and how they foster community to make sustainability more accessible. Rachel's approach reminds us that tackling climate issues doesn't have to be perfect. It's about being curious, intentional, and open to learning. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, Rachel. Welcome to How to Make the Climate Crisis Sexy. Can you tell the listeners how you make the climate crisis sexy?
Hello, darling. First, before we get in, can I ask what's bringing you joy at the minute before we get into this? Because I know this is going to be a really fun episode and I'm excited to get into it, but I just want to hear from you a little bit.
What's bringing me joy? I'm trying to think. I think, like we said, living life a bit more slowly and not drinking and just being very gentle with myself. I think I'm treating myself like I'm my own chihuahua. So I'm just you know how sometimes you do a whole day of work, and especially if you're freelance, you can stay at home the whole day and then you're like, oh, I don't feel very happy. And then it's if I was a chihuahua, would I be happy that I'd been sat inside all day? No. Take yourself for a walk like you're a dog.
Well, I'm obsessed with this mindset, treating yourself like a chihuahua. I'm actually obsessed. I feel like my version of that is being a little bit delusional and just romanticizing every aspect of your life. I feel like they kind of, in the same way, it's you're looking after yourself, you're romancing your inner child, all these things. But twisting it from the view of a chihuahua, I'm literally obsessed. I'm going to have to start using
that. What's bringing you joy?
Definitely slowing down, understanding my energy levels. I feel like I'm such a person where they're constantly fluctuating, and I feel like I'm getting FOMO if I'm not going to go to things, or I feel guilty that I can't attend things. And I think just when you're deep, actually I'm a neurodivergent person, I'm disabled, I'm actually allowed to prioritize my health and take ownership of I can fill my time however, doing whatever I want. And the more I'm taking ownership of that, the more I'm realising I'm playing more, doing more crafts. I'm actually having more intentional fun, because I'm overcoming people pleasing and stopping stressing about trying to please other people and instead listening to my needs. That's always going to be joyful. You're never going to regret putting yourself first or looking after yourself.
Yeah. And I think also a big thing is kind of showing up for yourself the way that you show up for other people.
Yeah.
So that the listeners can get to know you. How do you make the climate crisis sexy? How would you introduce yourself to them?
So I would say that I make the climate crisis sexy by celebrating sensitivity and accessibility and highlighting the importance of community and play and joy within these spaces. Professionally, I've worked within the fashion industry for about 6 or 7 years now, doing literally every various role that you could think of. I've done so many jobs within the creative industry over the past 6 years because I've got ADHD. If I've got a passion, I'm running at it full force. And I think that's how I approach my work, because I really struggle when people ask me what you do, because I do so many different things. But for right now, I'd say I'm a video journalist and a performer and a visual artist. But online, yeah, I really like to celebrate sensitivity and curiosity and community.
Yeah. And I think hearing you say that you've been in the fashion industry for the last 6 years, because I followed you for a while, and then I feel like I've slowly seen more sustainability and climate justice content work its way into your messaging, which I love. I love seeing people make that transition and holding their audience that they had beforehand and just holding their hand and taking them into a new space, but in a way that's not scary. It's not some shouty vegan man with a beard telling you that you're awful. It's kind of you sensitively being hey girlies, there's another way. We can do it like this.
Well, I think that's what we all kind of need. I feel like anytime we speak up for anything that we believe in, it is scary, because I think the risk of being scared of saying something wrong or being called out for saying the wrong thing, I completely get it. It's terrifying, but realistically, if we don't make mistakes, we don't learn. And I feel like it's only within the past, I'd say probably like a year or so, that I have really made a conscious effort to like invest my time more in learning about climate change and climate solutions and reading different books that people are putting out and keeping up with the conversation. And then I want people to learn with me. Like, I never want this to be a one-sided conversation where I'm like, I've got all the facts, blah, 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 because that's not the reality. We all live under this system that kind of gives us no alternative. So instead, if we actually come together to fight this, change can happen and like alternatives can be made, but it starts with ourselves. So yeah, I feel like that's why I'm just quite passionate about making this a space where it's more of a conversation. It's not me. This is at least my intention. Like, I never want to tell people like, this is exactly how you do it. It's more like, this is a way that we could explore this together.
I think we get so scared to speak out because it's like, you think that once you name yourself as someone who's interested in climate, you're held to that higher standard.
With perfectionism, like, speaking from my own experience, I have both ADHD and autism, and like I'm assumed to have OCD as well. And like, I've been a perfectionist my entire life because of the way that my symptoms presented. Like, I always was getting in trouble for things that I didn't mean to do or whatever. And because of that, my coping mechanism is to be constantly like one step ahead again, constantly being like, yeah, perfectionist about literally everything. So that means when it came to like the first time, because like there's been a few like parts of my life where I've really wanted to step into like climate justice space, but I've been so scared of not being perfect or saying the wrong thing that it scared me. And I just like didn't until I really started to like work through a lot of shame surrounding like perfectionism and surrounding like being perceived and all these things. And it's only now that I'm overcoming the perfectionism that I'm realizing actually this is a conversation that so many climate justice activists and activists in general are having, because no one's perfect. Like, no movement's perfect. No one person's perfect. It just doesn't exist. And the more all of us can hold space for that nuance and hold space for people to mess up and say the wrong thing and learn from the mistakes, all of these things, the more of us will actually be willing to come forward and speak our minds and like fight for what we feel is right.
And I think a lot of that is probably from our generation growing up online and witnessing a lot of people being cancelled. And I think through that, sometimes we've lost the art of dialogue and discussion, because even within the climate space, there's people who are very pro-nature-based solutions, people who are very pro-carbon capture, people who are more like climate justice oriented. And it's interesting to see sometimes how we see ourselves as oppositional versus part of the same fight and discussion.
Yeah, it's like we're a community. I think the more that you research into different social injustices, the more you see how it's all interconnected. It's like this light bulb moment where you're just like, fuck, all of these things actively feed each other, and like all of them ruin our planet, ruining our empathy towards each other. Like, we're dehumanizing people all for the sake of what, a few billionaires who are going to ruin our planet and then fuck off to Mars anyway. It's like, what are we doing? I like to remind myself we're literally floating on a rock. Do you know what I mean? But like, this rock is our responsibility. It's our responsibility to look after it. And I feel like as capitalism has risen, spirituality and spiritualism in terms of being in tune with the earth, being in tune with yourself, being in tune with community and like connection with ancestors, all of these things like have become less and less important in the West. And I just think we're so connected to each other, but as capitalism has continued to sell individualism and consumerism and all of these things, we're becoming more inward and more insular instead of actually kind of branching out roots to our community and being together and finding ways to like talk about these things together. Once you see how it's all connected, you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like it feels like you've had blinkers on the entire time.
That makes me think of the book Radical Intimacy. And she writes about community and the importance of community. And I didn't want to read it at first because I was like, oh God, I thought it was going to be like interpersonal intimacy. And I was like, oh, this is not going to be my vibe. And then reading it and seeing how she pulls out interpersonal intimacy into societal intimacy, and then how she puts that in within the healthcare system, the climate system, the class system, I think you then start to realize the centrality of community. And I think it's the thing that we all want that we think we're going to get through buying. Like, it's the thing that I have definitely felt has made me the happiest over the last few years.
I watched this amazing video essay by Mina Lay. I think it was called something like Third Places, Stanley Cup Mania and like Loneliness or something like that. And it was such a good essay. Basically, in the YouTube video, she spoke about how hyper consumerism is directly linked to loneliness. And like, especially because of online micro trends and TikTok shop and now like Amazon fashion, all these things like we're constantly being bombarded with. And like on social media, we feel it's kind of like a strange dynamic because on the one hand, we feel connected to community, but on the other hand, we are so isolated because of social media. And like the essay kind of draws parallels between how those two feed into each other, especially with the Stanley Cup mania that was going on TikTok. Because realistically, like if people are in their homes and they don't have third spaces to go to, they don't have places where they can be in community with other people, they're just at home. So all they're going to do is just fill their space up with things that make them feel comfortable or feel things that make them feel connected to other people. And a lot of time on the internet, it's trends. So if you have this Stanley Cup, all of a sudden you're now part of a community of other people online who have a Stanley Cup. Now we have all of these like cores popping up where if people are wearing like a certain aesthetic or like they look a certain way, they must have these specific morals or these hobbies or like there's this idea about them. And I just find it all so interesting because it feels, and this isn't necessarily a critique because I understand how easy it is to get trapped into online trends, especially because they do make you feel connected to people. But yeah, it's quite a sad thing when you realize like how interconnected they both are, like loneliness and just spending money to make yourself feel better. And like we're all guilty. Me going to the charity shops, like my enrichment time, like absolutely I'm doing that to make myself feel better about myself. Consumerism is this thing that's like, we're going to buy our way into new reality, but we can't. That's not the reality. Like we're overproducing and overconsuming at such dangerous, scary rates that we can't buy our way into a new reality.
Yeah, and that made me think about personal style, like hearing you talk about how style used to be something that you could then get a sense of a person. But I feel like because trends are cycling so fast, people are almost doing very, very quick buy-ins to an aesthetic or a look. And then all of a sudden, like, it's kind of like how we swung from clean girl to mob wife. That's such a different thing because everyone's so tired of all the clean girl stuff. So then they switch into mob wife. But the reason that someone who dresses like a mob wife looks amazing is because they've been curating that personal style for the last 5 to 10 years. It's why a clean girl looks amazing because she's invested in a coat that she's worn for the last 4 years. So she's got a really high quality coat. Or it's all of those small things of like, I think rebuilding a relationship with your wardrobe and actually thinking about it in like a curational way instead of just being like, I need to put on a costume. It's like, what's my relationship with my wardrobe? And I feel like that's why I really love your content, because I feel like any outfit you wear, it's like, oh, that's such a Rachel outfit.
Oh, thank you.
But I think that's like a very hard thing to develop now versus how it used to be, because you're constantly bombarded by, you know, it's even like I'm thinking about being a teenager and like loving to read Vogue when the fashion weeks came out and be like, oh, what's coming out? But we're getting that level of input every single week. It stops you flexing that muscle. And I was wondering kind of how you came to find your own personal style.
Oh my God. I feel like honestly being autistic really helped with this because for context, I didn't know I'm autistic until like quite recently, last year to be specific. And when you look back at your childhood, obviously there's so many signs that you've just missed. So fashion for me has always, always, always been a hyperfixation of mine. It's always made me feel like I can play and I can explore with like who I want to be, and I can put on a costume and like become whoever I want to be. So I feel like clothes are so powerful. And throughout school, I had so many different phases. I was a goth, I was an emo, I had like a 70s phase, I had like a 60s phase. I wanted to be a pin-up girl. Like I think during that experimentation era, I was just like, oh, I understand how clothes make me feel different. Because it's true, like you put on an outfit, like your energy changes, your mood changes. And I feel like, especially say you're like going to a job interview or a date or something, you dress for how you want to feel. So I think that's a big factor of my own personal style. It's like I think about the context of what I'm doing that day or like how I want to feel that day. If I'm feeling really groggy and a bit shitty and I've been in my pajamas for 7 hours, of course I'm going to feel like that because I've got my comfy clothes on. I haven't got outdoor clothes on. I think it's like a physical transition for a lot of neurodivergent people as well. It's like if I want to feel better or I want to work up the energy to wash my dishes or something, I'll put on a different outfit or like I'll put on shoes. So it's like a physical mindset change. Yeah, all of that definitely feeds into it. And more recently, I finally got like a wardrobe, because before I had this massive rail, and now I've got this wardrobe where it's so cute. It's like a little Facebook Marketplace find. And yeah, it's like a 1920s wooden cabinet. And because it's a lot smaller, it's meant that I've had to get rid of so many clothes. And in that process, I really just had to think about like, okay, how do I want to feel in these clothes? But especially like sensory wise. Because again, like with realizing I'm autistic, I just realized how important the sensory aspect of clothes are for me. And I think this is why sometimes I struggle a little bit with shopping on like eBay or Vinted, because I can't feel the texture. I don't know if the tag's like going to piss me off, or like I'm going to get itchy, or all these things. So yeah, when I was getting rid of all these clothes, I kind of took a note of all the clothes that I did keep. Why did I keep them? Do they stretchy? Is it sensory friendly? Do they make me feel good? Do I like how it looks on my body? Is it, giving off a certain vibe? Is it whimsical? Is it a bit of Stevie Nicks? Like all of these things I kept asking myself, like, why do I like these clothes and why am I getting rid of the other ones? And like such a big part of it was comfort, and the fact that in the kind of like visual world that I like to live in, how I like to dress and appear and stuff, these are the things that, yeah, feel right for me, like in that world.
That's so good, kind of taking stock of what you're keeping and then using that to build the next blocks and thinking like, what am I lacking? Like, what have I maybe got rid of that I need to get something, but I got rid of this thing because this wasn't quite my vibe or it wasn't quite right. I'm definitely in the process of that now. And I also really want to start using one of those clothes apps, the one that's like called Wearing, and you like scan in all your clothes and then you can like
pocket wardrobe.
Yeah, because I've realized like I have so many clothes I don't wear, and I was like, why am I not wearing them? Like these still fit and I still like them, but I just forget. And it's like this autumn I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try and make new outfits. It's my challenge to myself.
I feel like the way that you curate a space as well matters, especially because when it comes to like storing clothes and stuff, obviously like some people are going to have more space than others. And with the disposability culture that fast fashion kind of like lends itself to, it means that so many of us are like buying one thing for like one event and then just like chucking it out the next day, not thinking about, what do I already have in my wardrobe? Why do I need to buy something? It's not really people's first thought. Their first thought is like, oh, well, I'm going to this thing so that I need to look shiny and new, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, if we really take the time to go through, spend one day, bring a friend, have them sit on your bed, whatever, really intentionally just go through your wardrobe and just be like, what have I actually not wore for 5 years? Why can't I get rid of it? Is it sentimental? Did it belong to someone I loved? Do I love the fact that it's got like a story attached to it? Whatever it is, really assess what you have and like assess, I think, especially with ADHD, I realized that a big rail, a huge open exposed rail just didn't work for me because I was getting so overwhelmed when my room was a mess and there was clothes flying everywhere that I would end up wearing the same like 2 things on repeat. Whereas now that I've got like a closed wardrobe, it's just so much less chaotic and it's calmer, and I feel more excited to actually open my wardrobe and try on clothes. And yeah, like I know where they all are now. It's like little things like this, but it really does contribute to like the process of getting ready and looking after yourself.
Yeah, I think you're right with that. Actually, I feel like I'm on the journey with that. Like having less clothes in my room is more helpful because I can see them and I can put them together and I can wear them more, and I'm much more appreciative than like when you're just entering this chasm that's just stuffed with things that you're like, I'm not touching any of this because I'm just going to pick my jeans up off the floor and grab a top and go. Like you lose your sense of play. And you mentioned Vinted earlier, and I think the thing that I love the most about Vinted is being able to put in your size and then just see everything that you could wear, because I think so much of the discussion about sustainability and like sustainable fashion is dominated by very slim bodies, women that are like size 6 to 10. And there's a lot of guilt involved. They're like, everyone should be shopping sustainably. And it's like, okay, but every single shop you go into, you could buy, I don't know, you might not like it, but you could buy 70% of the clothes in there. And obviously the more you diverge from that, the smaller and smaller that selection gets. And the more intensive the labor is to find something that you'll like. I was wondering if this is something that you've also felt.
Constantly. I feel like especially one of my biggest pet peeves is when you go into a charity shop and like all the sizes are mixed. I can't deal with it because then it's just like I'm spending 90% of the time just going through clothes that I just know won't pass like my thigh. It just like won't fit me. And I feel like that's why apps like Vinted, oh my God, Vinted is that bitch. Like she knows she is. She's the golden girly pop of all this is secondhand shops. I love it, especially if you do like sort by lowest first. That's my top tip. Don't buy lowers first, because then you get all the bargains. But yeah, I feel like stuff like vintage, it's so helpful because you can actually see things in your size. Whereas it's really difficult, especially like in a lot of vintage shops where they will not stock anything past a size 16. And it's not as if like plus size people didn't exist back then.
From you speaking, it made me think of how also people put pictures of themselves in the clothes on Vinted. Whereas I think if you're shopping online, like I think I'm thinking about being a teenager and looking at Zara and the model always just being like incredibly rail thin, and then me being like, I actually have no idea how this item is even going to look on me because your body type is so different to mine, like, which is also why I like Vinted, because if I'm looking at other size 12 girlies, I'm like, oh, okay, that's actually giving me a very clear idea of what I'm going to look like in it versus looking at a standard size model.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it's still got such a long way to go. Every industry, it has such a long way to go in terms of representation and like accessibility, especially fast fashion. And I think one of the wild things as well is that like, even with the conversations around plus size clothing, half of these shops you can't walk in and get a size like above an 18. I feel like that's it. It's like when it comes to plus size fashion within fast fashion, it's sad because even items like trousers, so difficult to find decent quality plus size trousers. And I'll be so honest, like during lockdown, I did order off Shein, and like I have in the past, do you know what I mean? Like we're all, maybe we haven't, but I definitely have shopped from them in the past. And what I found is that like, because my thighs tend to rub together, I get chub rub, that every pair of trousers that I ever bought from Shein ended up having holes in them, like in the thighs, because of how thin and cheap the quality was. And like during the time I was just like, well, I can't go to charity shops, you know, like what are the other options? Any fast fashion retailer I ordered them from, within like a couple of months, they just disintegrated. And I'm like, okay, so this is just again feeding into that cycle of buying another pair, because this pair that's been so terribly made, where the people aren't getting paid properly and everything about it is like just terrible quality, like you're then having to reinvest in that. And it's like, what are the alternatives? And yeah, I made a pledge to myself, I think last year, I made a pledge to myself to not shop fast fashion unless it's an emergency, because I completely understand working class people needing you out with like a job interview or wanting to buy like something to feel nice. Like I completely get that. But I think the real issue is like middle and upper class people doing all of these £1,000 Shein haul, all these things. And it's just like, why do you need that amount of stuff? What are you missing? Like, why is that what's going to be fulfilling to you? Why are we so disassociated from the fact that all of these clothes eventually, like when disposability culture kicks in, you don't want this one piece that you bought 3 months ago that you thought you were going to wear but never have. You know, you throw that to landfill or like a clothes donation. The majority of those clothes are then going to end up back in the global south. I can't remember the statistic, but a huge portion of all of these clothes that are donated back to the global south, they don't want, and therefore they're piling up into landfill and then causing fires because the temperature's so hot that they're catching on fire. And it's like the people who are forced to make these clothes for pennies, who don't want them, like donated back to them anyway, they're then fighting the environmental crises that these products are creating. It's just, yeah, it's just sad. And I feel like when you become aware of these problems, it does make you be like, well, how am I contributing to that? You know, like what can I actually do? And I don't want to necessarily shame anyone for like shopping fast fashion, because like I know there's nuance to it, but I just feel like people need to be really intentional about how much they buy, what they buy. Is there alternatives that you can choose from? You know, if you really wanted to, could you not buy this new outfit from H&M or wherever? How about you go back into your wardrobe and see what you already have and like cut something up or style it differently, or like watch someone's TikTok about how they would style these things. It's like there's so many different ways that we can be creative and expressive and have fun and play and experiment with our clothes that doesn't cause harm. Because I think that's one of the biggest things about sustainability, is that it has to be something that we can continue to like do and like uphold.
I think it's really interesting how you were talking about the difference between consumption between someone who's working class, middle class and upper class. And I think it's something that isn't spoken about enough. I think it's used as a lazy critique. You know, people are like, we need fast fashion because not everyone can afford to buy clothes. And I'm always like, I'm not talking about the person that's going to H&M to buy new work trousers and a shirt and maybe 2 other items that will last, that will be like their autumn new clothes. I'm talking about my peers who are on good salaries, who are going in and buying 10 items, not wearing half of them, getting rid of them and doing the same thing the next month because they've got another night out. And I think that is something that, it feels like a lazy critique or a lazy justification, because I think people aren't quite honest about how much they could afford. Like, I was looking at some stats and it was just showing how little of our income we spend on clothing now in comparison to the past, even in comparison to like the 2000s versus the 2010s. Like, there was a big shift in expectations of how much to pay, which has now led to a sense that either there's these sustainable alternatives that are naturally going to be far more expensive because people are being paid in a just and fair way, or there's this fast fashion, or then some people are unfamiliar or feel like, charity shopping is inconvenient. So it's just about kind of really guiding mindsets and showing that things should cost as much as they cost. And I think this was something we were talking about earlier, like a deep dissonance at the moment between sustainable fashion and labour practices. I think we think about it in terms of carbon and pollution and materials, but I'm not quite sure. I think we might have lost the messaging that we learned from like Rana Plaza and Who Makes My Clothes. In the mainstream, we talk about it much more as like an environmental damage, because it is a social damage as well.
I feel like that's it. I feel like in the West, especially like us white people, we're so disconnected to our clothing in terms of culture, in terms of ancestry, in terms of, where was this garment made? And because of that, people are fine, or like the majority of people who buy fast fashion understand that, yes, these are used for like slave labor, but like they don't give it a second thought. And I feel like it's sad because then this like conversation of classism, when the conversation gets brought up, the argument is like, oh, but it's classist to say you shouldn't buy fast fashion. But it's like, is it not then classist to then not think about the workers in the global south who are making these garments for you at such an extortionately low price? Like, it's not ethical. It's like so immoral. And I just feel like the classist argument, I understand it has its nuances, but I think we need to like critically think about the way that we're showing up in this. And I feel like that's where a lot of tension comes up, because I think people don't want to think of themselves as bad people, which I get. But it's not that we're bad people, but we can still partake in things that we know aren't great. We can still turn a blind eye to a lot of things that we know are going on, but we just rather not think about it because it's an inconvenience. And I'm really interested in thinking about how do we add a bit more tenderness to that so that people can actually feel comfortable enough to interrogate their own beliefs and interrogate their practices. Because I think we don't do it enough. I feel like not enough of us really sit down and think, okay, like, what can I do? Or like, what small action can I change? Again, probably because this expectation that if you're going to show up in any social justice space, you need to be all encompassing, like all in, like you need to be on the front lines, you need to be involved in direct action, like all of these things, where it's actually like small changes add up. And small changes are so necessary for a bigger global impact, because it's like a domino effect. If you make a pledge to yourself, you know what, from now on, I'm going to buy like one garment a year or something from fast fashion, and the rest I'm going to buy from secondhand shops, I'm going to buy from Vinted, eBay, I'm going to upcycle, blah, blah, blah. You could get your friends involved. You could have crafts days. You could have clothes swaps. You could go to charity shops together. You could go car boot sales together. It's like, you can actually make this like a practice of life. You can find a way to make this part of your everyday reality of like connecting with yourself, with your friends, with your community, with like your own personal style. Like there's so many ways that we can just interrogate it so that we're both acknowledging our part in it, but also showing ourselves like it's okay that we're showing up imperfectly in these spaces.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with framing not being able to buy fast fashion, or not framing not shopping fast fashion as a loss. It's a loss of convenience, it's a loss of XYZ, but actually what you're getting in return is a wardrobe full of pieces that you have consciously bought and probably actively love, and they probably fit in with your personal style a bit more because you're not shopping in such a like zombified way. You're really deciding like, oh, I would like this, this and this. I mean, one thing that I do to try and rein back the impulsive shopping is I keep a list of everything I want and then I add to it. And then if I've added something one week that I really don't really care about the next week, it comes off. But normally then it means that I can go into a car boot sale. I know that I'm looking for a red pair of boots. Let's go find them. And I've just done that process a bit more consciously.
And then it feels like a bit like a treasure hunt to like find them like secondhand. I feel like that's what I love. It's like the thrill. It's like, you know, one specific item, and it's like exciting to be able to like go out into the wild and like hunt for it, you know? I'm like, where can I get my hands on this? And like, it's like an enrichment activity for you to do.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite thrifted finds?
So I didn't buy these, but my best friend Lottie, she found me I've been looking at these fake Gucci shoes for like years. They're the perfect heel because I can't really do like a tiny little kitten heel. That doesn't really work for like plus size bodies. But like these Gucci platforms, they're like from the 70s. They were like perfect. I literally couldn't find any online for like years. And then my friend Lloyd, for my birthday, she was like, I just went to the car boot sale this morning and I've got you a present. And I was like, okay, cute. But what she got me like the exact pair that I've been looking for years and like heavily discounted. Yeah, and she just got me them for my birthday. And I was just like, I am going to hold on to these for my entire life. And you know what? It's not the fact that they're even Gucci. It's the fact that they're original 70s because I love 70s clothing. And it's the fact that they're like a cream colour. They're this platform that it's like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like an equal platform. So it's almost like a flat shoe, but it's not. It's comfy as well.
I was going to say, that's such a lovely story about Lloyd getting you the perfect pair of shoes.
I screamed when I opened them, sobbed, and then I just gave her like the fattest cuddle because I was just like, I cannot believe you just found these. And you were like, Rachel would want these, and then bought them and then I was just like, the whole process, I was so overwhelmed. I was like, that is friendship, you know?
Oh my God, I'm PMSing. I'm like crying already. I'm literally tearing up.
Send screenshots of all the things you want off in it to your friends, stick it in the group chat.
Be like, hi guys, I'm hunting for this.
That's the thing, it's like clothing can really bring you closer to people. Even like swapping clothes with your friends or like borrowing clothes from your friends. I love it. It's such a fun process of being in your friend's room and properly going through the clothes and be like, can I borrow this?
So what advice would you give to someone who's listened to this podcast episode and they are new to sustainable fashion, but they're like, okay, I want to start trying to be more connected to my wardrobe and to be a little bit more sustainable? What would be the top 3 things you would encourage them to do?
So the first thing I would say is just get curious about what kind of clothes you enjoy wearing and like what purpose do clothes serve you? Is it mainly comfort? Is it mainly like you want to embody confidence? You know, do you want to feel like you're a fairy? Really like think about the intention that you have with clothes and like how you want your experience with your wardrobe to kind of be like. And then I'd say, think about the pieces that you already have within your wardrobe. What do you like about them? Why do you have multiples of like a certain thing? Why have you never been able to get rid of a certain piece of clothing? Think about that. And then whenever you're going into buying new clothes, then you can think about, oh, well, is this an elasticated waist if I really like stretchy pants, you know? Is this fabric scratchy? Will I actually wear this? Like, and I think a big one as well is, does this already go with things I already own? Because I think sometimes I get so distracted by like a shiny object and vintage that I'm like, oh, this will be so gorgeous, blah, blah, blah. But then I'm like, realistically, am I going to wear it? And does it already fit in with the styling pieces of other things that I can put it with? Because if it doesn't, I'm not going to buy it because I know it's just going to sit in my wardrobe and I'm not going to touch it. So yeah, I feel like just like playing with it and like experimenting with different styles and experimenting with what would you, as like a younger version of yourself, what would you want to be wearing? And yeah, definitely check out Vinted, eBay, go to Clothes Swap, especially if you're plus size and you're listening to this and you're just like, well, I can't find clothes that fit fat people like on these apps and stuff. There are specific fat clothes swaps that are popping up all over the UK and probably like in different countries too. If there's not one, organize one. You know, you can build a community from other people who are looking for the same things. If you're wanting to like step into this space, just like be compassionate with yourself and just do it intentionally, but like also do it at a pace that you feel comfortable with, because we're not saying like completely get rid of all your clothes, put them all in the bin and start afresh. Like, that's the opposite of what we're trying to say. I think I'm just trying to say, like, yeah, be more intentional about what it is that you want to buy. Maybe write a list of something that you want to get and keep those lists so that when you go back to charity shopping or scrolling the apps, you actually have things that you can find that you've wanted for like a while. So it's less likely to be like a compulsion.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. And especially that the things in your wardrobe are the most sustainable things you own because you already own them. So for anyone who wants to see more of your work and what you're up to, where can they find you?
So they can find me on Instagram and TikTok at rach.e.lle. And hopefully very soon I'll be facilitating some workshops that will be popping up in and around London. They're going to be about how the personal is political. And unless we work through like big topics like conflict resolution and like how do we handle emotions, like how do we regulate ourselves, how are we consciously checking ourselves and checking in with ourselves, unless like we've really started intentionally spending time working through these, it's going to be difficult for us to show up in political spaces. So yeah, I've applied for some funding to create these. So hopefully by the time this comes out or whenever, yeah, they'll be available for people to come in, get involved with. Because as I said, I think it's really important that we learn it together and we hold space for each other to make mistakes and just learn everything together. It's a journey.
Amazing. Well, it's been lovely to have you on today. It was so great to speak with Rachel today and hear about their journey through the fashion industry and how they're bringing creativity, play, and accessibility to the conversation around sustainability. If you've enjoyed today's episode, you can find links to Rachel's work in the show notes, and don't forget to follow Sexy Climate Change on Instagram. As an independent production, this show relies on your support to grow. Every like, share, and comment on Instagram or your favourite podcast platform goes a long way. Thanks for tuning in, and there's many more inspiring guests lined up, each bringing their own innovative idea to the climate space. See you next time.